Hello, everybody. I think we can kick things off little by little, and if there are any more participants joining us, that will be lovely. It's very nice to see a nice turnout. I hope more people will join us too, and nice to see always familiar faces with us here. My name is Hande Özkayagan-Prändl. I'm a research associate at the University of Vienna's Department of Innovation and Digitalisation in Law, and I will be the moderator of this panel today. Before kicking things off, I would like to briefly mention and give a bit of shout out to our department, which is the organizer of this panel, the Department of Innovation and Digitalisation in Law from University of Vienna. It's one of its kind at the university, which tries to focus on mind-burning questions with respect to information society, data protection, artificial intelligence, intellectual property law, and basically pretty much like all various developments with respect to technology and innovation. And we are involved with many different EU-funded projects, one of which we will also tackle today, like mentioned briefly within the scope of our panel topic, the Trustworthy project, where we, as Team ID, like the abbreviation for our department, we conduct research and give insights on questions of data protection, privacy, AI, and legal compliance in the research project. And today we will be tackling together trustworthy data spaces from the perspective of their developers and users, the challenges ahead, and like the way forward. Because I think it's quite nice, like it's a good transition from the first panel that we listened to that was also related to data spaces, but more tackling the topic of synthetic data and the use of synthetic data within data spaces. Here today, we would like to focus a bit more on the users and the developers of data spaces, what challenges they face within this like scope of this proliferation of different data systems and like data space and ecosystems that we're tackling and that we're seeing recently, and how we could perhaps solve these challenges, what techniques do we need to think about, like how these two parties, the developers and the end users, can talk more with each other to ensure trustworthiness. And we will try to tackle together to understand what trustworthiness means, how do we ensure it, and sort of touch upon different architecture blocks, so to say, of trustworthiness, both from the perspective of some technical partners. We have quite some technical people here on our panel today too, but also from the legal perspective and more from an end user ethical perspective. So I think we have quite a good balance of speakers today in our panel too. Let me see. I would like to briefly also mention to you the overview of our panel, how we will try to conduct it today. Basically, in the first 5 to 8 minutes, hopefully we'll try to be quite like timely as well. I would ask each of our panelists to give some sort of introductory statements with respect to their perspective, like from a technical perspective, also from, as I said, the Trustee project. We have also representatives from the International Data Spaces Association, IDSA, so they will also try to describe to us the challenges from their perspective with respect to convergence of different data spaces initiatives and organizations. We will also hear a bit from the legal challenges. What does a data space really mean? What regulations do we have to tackle this? Because now we're currently facing a wave of different regulations that are all trying to say something about this interaction with respect to the exchange of data, the sharing of data, but what are we really talking about here? And also try to understand the end user perspective with respect to what they see as potential challenges and what interest that they would like to see in a data space while using a data space. I'm checking also the speakers that we see on the slide at the moment. I would like to very briefly mention that we have a slight change to the panelists today. Sebastian Steinbuss from International Data Spaces Association could not be here with us today, but instead we have Sonia Jimenez, who will be, I'm very happy to announce that like she will be helping us understand what International Data Space Association is trying to do with respect to data spaces and ensuring trust within this whole ecosystem. Actually, I can perhaps start kicking things off by very briefly introducing Sonia and then giving her the floor, if that's okay, that you can kick things off. Sonia Jimenez is the Director of Data Space Technology at the International Data Space Association, and her expertise lies in privacy, certification, data spaces in the energy domain, and personal data spaces. And she's responsible currently from overseeing the IDS certification, which we'll also hopefully hear a bit more about in our upcoming bullet points. So again, the idea after the introductory statements, I will ask more tailored questions, more specific questions to our panelists, sort of lead the discussion into, okay, how do we overcome these challenges and what is the way forward for us? So that will be the idea. Sonia, let's hear from you. Please kick things off.
Thank you. Should we move to the next slide already? Thank you.
1 minute. Perfect.
Yes, so hi everyone, very glad to be here with you. So I'm going to start with some theory, some explanation of what we understand by a data space. And here, I hope you can see in this picture, you have many different endpoints. So this example is from manufacturing sector. You have at the bottom machines that generate data, and that data can be sent to different places. So it can be sent from company A to company B, from machine A to machine B. It can be sent from the company that's generating the data to a marketplace, to an IoT cloud, etc., etc. And the sum of all these endpoints, this is what we will call a data space. This is a very high-level generic definition, but it kind of shows the concept. And here, what can happen? So if you may decide, you generate this data, you may decide, okay, my data is not sensitive, I can just send it by the traditional means, internet, whatever, I don't need to secure it, I send it as it is. But in other cases, you may say, no, my data has a value, and I cannot just send it out without security. I need some security mechanisms, because maybe it's sensitive data, maybe because I want to trade with this data. And then you need to do this in a secure way. And in a data space, both things can coexist. What the IDS does is we bring the mechanisms to make this data sharing trustworthy and secure. And you would see there some blue bubbles in this picture. Those blue bubbles are the IDS connectors that I will talk briefly in a moment. But going back to the architecture of the data space, what's important is that we have a federated architecture. That means data stays where it is and goes peer-to-peer. So we don't need a central data lake where data is sent to. We have interoperability. So this is from the technical and semantic perspective, the challenge to make sure all these endpoints are interoperable. So I can technically send you the data, and you can also understand the data that I send you. So this is from the technical perspective, something that we work on. There's data sovereignty and traceability. So I send you the data and I get to decide what happens with my data. What can you do with my data? So I, as a data provider, I get to decide what happens to the data. I have control over it. And the last point is trusted participants. So companies are very reluctant to share data because they think they're going to keep, they don't know who they're going to send them to, and they think they're going to lose the control of their data. So we have to make sure that all these participants in these ecosystems can be trusted. So they all play with the same rules. So they meet the same requirements and they can all be trustworthy. So this is what I'll explain later with the IDEA certification. Maybe moving to the next slide. This picture that you see here is, in the data space, we can have many data providers, data consumers. From the IDS perspective, what they need to do to have to be able to participate in the data space is the IDS connector. So the connector is a gateway that provides additional functionality, like this usage control that I mentioned, identity management. So all the participants need to have an identity, be identifiable, digital identity. There are other components that IDS defines for a data space. So the main one is the connector. Then we have the components that generate the identities, that log the transactions, et cetera, et cetera. But important, the connector is mandatory for all the participants that want to participate in an IDS-based data space.
Perfect. Thank you so much. I think we will also touch more upon the points, some of the points you mentioned, for instance, the trustworthiness and accountability and traceability of the actions, what happens to the data when the data is shared, how can the providers still trace the data and sort of set the usage policies and access policies with respect to the data they share, because that's also one of the key components on defining trustworthiness to ensure that there are trust between the different participants of data spaces, right?
Exactly.
I would like to then give the floor to Alberto. Before I do that, I'll just very briefly present you to our audience. Alberto Berreteaga, he's the IDS Competence Center Coordinator at TECNALIA, the largest center of applied research and technological development located in Spain, a member of the Basque Research and Technology Alliance, and he specialized in software engineering and cybersecurity and works mainly with data spaces Gaia X and ideas. And that's why I would also like to pose the question to you, because you have a very good overview with respect to all these different initiatives for data spaces and that have all their own perhaps certification regimes, like that they're trying to build this infrastructure and architecture blocks with respect to data spaces. Is this proliferation good? How do we come to a convergence? Like, are there challenges that are associated to this? Just perhaps you can give us a brief overview with respect to how the ecosystem looks like at the moment.
Okay. Hello everybody, and good morning. And well, you have just here one of the best definitions I can find about what a data space is. But for years now, quite a lot of organization initiatives, we have been working around data spaces, so about what today we think a data space is. But for years and years, we had different definitions and different approaches. Here at the bottom left, you can read another definition or another approach about what a space is. And quite a lot of pictures at the left. You have the dark one is a pure IDSA architecture. The right one has to do with Gaia-X architecture and different federated data spaces. The bottom left has to do with the Spanish tourism data space that mix Gaia-X concepts and IDS technology. At the bottom right, you have the data space support center approach to the building blocks. And I am using quite a lot of names, quite a lot of approaches, and that's really important because for years, as I say, different parties, we have been working around these concepts. What nowadays we know as the Data Space Business Alliance, that is a huge association where, well, the logos are a bit smaller, but you can find there the Big Data Business Alliance. For years, they have been working around big data, AI, processing data. Fiverr Foundation, again, a well-known initiative, association, and dealing with services, with infrastructure, with quite a lot of things, but they are dealing with data and data processing too. Gaia-X, well, I'm not going to go in deep, but it's a huge European initiative that has to do with software, with data, with infrastructure, with hardware, with software, quite a lot of approaches. And data exchange is one of their main goals too. We are doing this for the data, so it's really important for them. And last but not at all least, the International Data Space Association, that perhaps I think they have the more mature technology and a clear view of what a data space is and what can be done with them. But we need quite a lot of things. We need to federate the data spaces. We need to merge different technologies, emerging technologies. We have a European Data Act, Data Governance Act, digital, quite a lot of regulation and other influences, not only technical requirements, but legal requirements and other requirements that we need to imply and to introduce in these data spaces. And at the bottom right, you have the logo of the Data Spaces Support Center. That is an initiative that is running from last year. It's 2 years now. Yeah, it's quite new, but European Commission was aware about this kind of problem. No? Quite a lot of people working around, and we need to focus. We need a support center, a clear point where everybody who wants to know about data spaces can go, can request more information. We need an organization there that deals not only with the data space business analysis, with the global technology and the global approaches. And what they are doing is to merge everything and to make a real convergence of this kind of technologies. As I said, the bottom right picture you have there, they say, okay, we are not going to push any technology. We are not going to lock one vendor. We are not going to trust a single solution. What we're going to do is to build and to design and to prevent vendor locking, providing this kind of ideas, designs. You can see here, there are little bit different building blocks. The orange one, they had to do with the technology and with the organization of the technology. And the right green ones, they have to do with the governance. They are compiling the core concepts of data spaces, and they are providing the ideas about, okay, if you are doing this way, you are working in data space, you are building a data space, you are collaborating in a data space. So this idea of convergence is what we have nowadays. Quite a lot of challenge because technology is evolving and evolving. We are finding new solutions. but each day we have a more clear view about what a data space is and what will be used for us in Europe. As you heard yesterday and today, the European health data space that will be huge, but do not think only about huge data spaces. We can find small data spaces in regions, in small infrastructure facilities, with less parties, federated or not with other data space. We will chat about that later on.
Perfect. Thank you very much. That's indeed very true. We have a proliferation of all different types of data spaces. The focus is mainly on some particular sectors, yes, but there are also a lot of EU-funded research projects at the moment that are trying to tackle what can be a collaborator of a data space. How do we sort of make the link between all these initiatives that we're seeing with Gaia X, with Data Space Support Center? How can the building blocks and the infrastructure that they're trying to set can be adopted by different initiatives that are being funded by the EU, and how would they find solutions with respect to safe and secure, privacy, respectful of privacy, data sharing, data exchange, and again, some different privacy enhancing techniques. These are all a lot being discussed at the moment, and we are right in the middle of it, so to say, as a department too, because we are a part of a project that actually is very much has to do with this, which is called the Trustee project. I can already perhaps pass to the other slide, but I will here give the floor to Evangelos, and let me first also introduce you, of course. Professor Evangelos Markakis is an assistant professor and principal investigator of Pasifea Lab of the Hellenic Mediterranean University, and he has quite some experience with respect to European-funded projects. He has worked over 20 years in European-funded projects in different roles, and his primary areas of expertise consist of fog computing, networking, emergency communications, wireless and broadband networks. So he's a very, very strong technical partner for us, trying to help us understand in the project what all these technical terminologies mean, and where we sort of try to step in with respect from the legal perspective, trying to keep the balance. But I will ask him at the moment to perhaps talk us a bit about the Trustee project, because it's not exactly a data space, but it's a collaborator of a data space, because here we also try to understand all these different actors and participants that can be in contact with particular data spaces. So what would you share about with us?
Okay, in our view, we are taking a different path. We are creating a trustee. We are creating a mediator, a middleman that is there in order to unite and enable the multidisciplinarity of data. This is something stemming from EU, the multidisciplinarity of various sectors, and trustee is there in order to promote a new way of handling data. We are using a technique called homomorphic encryption that has the ability, the data owner, to encrypt homomorphically his data, put them in a federation of the other data that can be coming from different data spaces, and enable the search over them without compromising any part of his data privacy. If he wants to provide the reply to the one doing the search, he can see the results, and if he approves them, he can then provide them to the end user. This homomorphic encryption technique that we'll be using enables the multidisciplinarity of this data, but on the same time, you have the full control of your data. So in this way, you are even the part of using and reusing is being done in a way that you are able to know, but at the same time to provide access to the data you are bringing inside a common pool of data. In Trustee, which is a European project, we are creating this federation platform, this mediator, that will be able to be a middleman among various data providers. And by using state-of-the-art techniques like homomorphic encryption, self-sovereign identities, we will be enabling not only the search, but also lightweight computation on encrypted data. So in the same time that we were discussing the previous session that we need to create data, in these techniques that we will be using, we are using the data that the data owner is having, but it's fully encrypted. You don't have access to them, and you are able to do computation over them with the approval of the data owner. So in this way, we are trying to create a safer data usage and also to be able to handle the use and reuse and the secondary use of data without compromising in any part the security and the privacy of this data. Furthermore, we are solving inside the premise of the project the part of data leakage that can be happening with AI ML running on data. I try to be as high level as possible.
Thank you very much. I mean, we will dive into a bit homomorphic encryption as a privacy enhancing technique. There's a lot of research going on in this field, and also in our project too, we're really trying to tackle how this can facilitate like a meaningful research over encrypted data, like to enhance also and encourage the secondary use of data, because in the end, that's also one of the primary objectives of data spaces, to ensure that's how the European Commission embarked on this journey, right? To explore the potential of data and to create more value out of data, to encourage parties not to hold data behind locked doors, but to share data with multiple parties, but while keeping the data still secure and respecting the privacy of individuals as well, and anyone, or confidentiality of certain data sets. But perhaps now I will shoot the ball to you, Katarzyna, with respect to giving us a bit of an overview with respect to the legal challenges, because we have also like a wave of different EU regulations coming at the moment. They are sort of interacting, but we don't know what exactly like a data spaces means, like, because we don't perhaps necessarily have a definition, and we have a hard time fitting this data space construct into all these new initiatives and regulations. So how can we sort of navigate out of this? We will come to that in the bullet points, but perhaps just first set us a bit the legal challenges ahead. And also, of course, let me very briefly introduce my colleague. Katarzyna Barbero is a research associate at the Department of Innovation and Digitalisation in Law at the University of Vienna. She's also working in various EU-funded technology projects, also in Trustworthy too, and her legal expertise focuses on development of new technical solutions in data processing and analytics, and AI ML solutions as well, and their applications in the EU data spaces, secondary use of data and data reuse, and associated risk with respect to this. So take it away.
First of all, good morning, everyone. It's really a pleasure to see so many of you here participating and joining our discussion. From my perspective, I would try to, let's say, combine the aspects that are relevant from the perspective not only of our project, Trustworthy, but also of data spaces, different initiatives that were already mentioned by Alberto, or that were discussed in more depth by Sonia. In Trustworthy, we were trying to find out what a data space is and how we should position ourselves from the legal perspective. And the first question that you rightfully asked is what a data space is from the legal perspective. And of course, we hear about the European strategy for data. We hear the term common European data spaces, but at the moment, it's not necessarily defined in the legal acts. I mean, we have the Data Governance Act, which in one of the articles that refers to European Data Innovation Board states that European Data Innovation Board should provide the guidance for common European data spaces, and then refers more or less what the data space is, but we do not have a legal definition per se. And also the proposal of Data Act, at least the version provided by the European Commission, also uses the term data spaces or operators of data spaces, but do not necessarily explain what it is, or doesn't provide the limitations of the term. And here is what the community is doing, is trying to define from the technical perspective, but also from the governance perspective, what data space is, what are the limitations, what are the components that create data space. And from our perspective, it would be great to hear what the legal act could state about that, and what exactly data space is. Another aspect that was rightfully indicated by you is that we have a patchwork of regulatory framework, and of course it's difficult for especially the data spaces participants to navigate in all of the acts that are not only part of the European strategy for data, but also among already existing frameworks such as data protection, cybersecurity, or intellectual property. And here, I believe that what would be great is to jointly collaborate, and this is also great that Data Spaces Support Center emerged, because it's important to collaborate and to find out the way, the methodology, most probably, for data spaces, how to go through those acts, how to interpret terms that are included in there, and also, of course, considering the use cases that may appear in the data spaces environment. I mean, to adjust specific terms and to help the technical developers understand what are the obligations and what are the responsibilities and what kind of aspects need to be addressed from the moment of the data space creation until the moment of its implementation or exploitation. Another aspect that is of relevance is also to be able to use the common terminology among all of the different initiatives. We have different participants to data spaces, as I mentioned. We have, but also participant is not necessarily defined, operator is not necessarily defined. Then different initiatives use different terminologies when it comes to names of different actors being part of the data spaces. We have data owners, we have data providers, we have data holders. Data holders are also defined in Data Governance Act, but also in the proposal of the Data Act, not necessarily exactly in line. So here again, there is a need of finding the common terminology at this at the data spaces initiative level, so that projects such as Trustworthy, for example, could also refer to this and not reinvent the wheel, and also to align this terminology that is more of let's say bottom-up. The initiative that is conducted by the initiatives to align it with the legal terms as well. Another point that is of relevance, I will not dwell too much into it, I know I'm taking too much time, but it's also the aspect of creating, let's say, interoperable contractual framework for data usage, data exchange, data control, that would allow the data spaces not only to be interoperable within the data space, but also in inter-data spaces between different data initiatives. The same pertains to the governance models, also to understand what kind of governance models are there, what kind of governance models can be adhered to by the participants to the data space of the data spaces. And last but not least, what is also a challenge is to assess the new emerging technologies from the legal perspective. And here you mentioned homomorphic encryption. We also have federated learning. We heard about the synthetic data. And in this case, for example, the aspect of what is personal, what is non-personal when we apply those techniques is a very relevant question. Also to understand what then are the responsibilities and the obligations of, as I mentioned, different actors within the data spaces environment. Yes, and I believe that we will then focus on different specific points later on. So thank you.
Exactly. I will pick your brain with respect to homomorphic encryption and how the legal regime applies to it, same as accountability, because you mentioned very fair points. It's important to create a trustworthy data space, obviously, that to give the feeling to all the participants of the data spaces that the actions that are happening within a data space are accountable, are traceable, are transparent, and that we have the governance models and also the technical infrastructure to facilitate this, right? And we will hopefully have the time to touch upon these in a bit more detail. But you also mentioned something very important, the use cases, because we need to also understand and try to perhaps explore a bit these different use cases that would aim to use data spaces for specific purposes. Then there are all these different sectoral needs, there are all these different groups that have their own interests that they would like to seek with respect to, while sharing data and while trying to seek for the privacy of individuals, the confidentiality of certain data, as I mentioned. And there I think Veli would have really valuable comments for us, because she also represents quite strongly from an end user perspective, especially from the education sector. And I would first, of course, like to introduce you very briefly. Dr. Veli Hillman is the founder of Education Data Digital Safeguards and a partner at ETOILE Partners, which is a consultancy firm based in the UK, leading the education technology team there and advising on the ethical use of education data. And she's a visiting fellow at the London School of Economics and Political Science too, and where she researches on the use of AI systems in the schools and the rights and freedoms of children and young people especially. And But I would like to hear from you, of course, is a bit of more of an end user perspective. Who do we talk about when we say end users of data spaces? Because there are so many different parties involved, and as I said, they have all different stakes here that they would like to protect or they would like to use a data space for. So perhaps you could touch a bit upon that to set us, like, again, an overview, which we can again follow up on later on with respect to the challenges that come with this, right?
Thank you very much. Hi, everyone. Yeah, I really like how this all rounded down to discussing, well, who are these data spaces being built for, and who are we imagining all of these opportunities for using data? As part of Trustee project, as you heard, but also other data spaces, a lot of questions are emerging with regards to who are the end users, who are the stakeholders, who are the actors, who are individuals, but also the collective, so groups of individuals, and who will ultimately be impacted by and in what ways. I'm really happy that even the previous panel touched upon, especially with the last question. So this is very pertinent even to our project and broadly on data spaces. We really focus quite a lot with regards to Trustee project on identifying these specific personas and specific actors, identifying both the risks, the opportunities, identifying ways to define the different scenarios and the different critical ways that should be addressed, whether from legal perspective, from technical perspective, but also grounded with the question of socio-ethical impact. What is the impact to society, to individuals? What is the point to data spaces, to having access to data from different domains for secondary data use, deploying AI functionalities for exploiting further the opportunity from having so much data around us? There is obviously the actors are many. The interests are from scientists, media, policymakers, public industry, and so on. In fact, there are also end users such as data providers, data model developers, and other entities that can, are building their own projects similar to data spaces like Trustee. And as a result, this creates so many more tensions and challenges in terms of, data quality, or how do we make sure that whatever the data processing or repurposing secondary data use is impacting positively those who are providing the data, but also those who are in some way related to this data. This is a very simplified slide that I've shared, but in no way exhaustive. So we may envision end users who may be challenged by needs for data quality, strong security and identity management. They may be interested in multidisciplinary data exchange, secondary use of data, but from all of these things, more questions sprout. They may want alignments between different data formats across domains, and these are challenges that we are currently experiencing, and not only Trustee project, but others. And what are, for example, data providers themselves as other kind of stakeholders within these data spaces are challenged by. So they would like to meet privacy restrictions, or they may be faced with intellectual property rights matters. They may be challenged by the risk of data loss of control over data. They may need or should attend to legal socio-ethical requirements, but what are those exactly? And how do we make sure that we're exhaustive around the different scenarios from exploiting data for secondary purpose, and ensuring that in those scenarios we've addressed all the legal requirements, all the socio-ethical requirements. So from end user perspective, the scenarios and the challenges and the tensions can never be exhaustive. And with the previous panel, I just wanted to kind of add my 2 cents to this comment, but the question was, for those who did not attend, but the question was with regards to whether we need to envision something more beyond data privacy impact assessments, something related to AI impact assessments and so on. I don't think we have the full answers yet. There are certain unknowns that we cannot envision. So for that, I'm sure that we will delve further with the questions on this panel, but more robust research and more investigation is necessary. I just wanted to finish on provide two examples around scenarios and how we cannot be exhaustive around what are the risks, what are the challenges and tensions that we need to address from socio-ethical, legal, and technical, so non-technical and technical perspective. So imagine education data, since this is the domain that I work on as a researcher. There is a lot of sensitive data in education, and yet we can combine data from education and from energy to identify how to optimize energy use in schools. So there's relatively very little risk to the kind of data that we're combining from education side. Something like a transport, so then as a second example, data from sensory data from cars, for example, that's something slightly innocuous, typically innocuous data. So something that you don't necessarily have any personal data, so it's not necessarily high risk involved. But if you combine that with health data, let's say in a car accident, and this is an example we investigated with our partners at Trustworthy, suddenly you've got health-related data, perhaps relating to the driver who got involved in a car accident, in combination with that transport data. So you've got the data from the car and the data from the person who was involved in the accident. Now we've got a new combination of things and new challenges that we need to address from ethical, legal, and so on, even though we want to explore further, optimize and analyze the data from this new combination. So I'll stop here. Thank you very much.
No, that's actually great, because that would also allow me to perhaps do like a smooth transition into our more specific questions, so to say. And I know we sort of outlined here all the challenges, which is horrible. Like we need to now of course, navigate through how to solve this. Like how do we overcome all these challenges? Are all these different terminologies, these different use cases? Like can we perhaps use some particular techniques to tackle this? And that would actually be my first question, because we very briefly hinted at these new privacy enhancing techniques that are coming up. In the previous panel, we discussed synthetic data mainly as a different approach. And here in the Trustworthy project, as Evangelos also hinted at, there is this approach we have by using or exploring homomorphic encryption, like being able to do some certain computations over encrypted data without risking any privacy of the individuals or the people sharing the data, so to say. And also this would allow perhaps in a more secure manner the combination of different data sets, like the use case example that you gave, because perhaps a data set in isolation might not be problematic, but when combined with other sectoral data, then that can perhaps cause a rising of new challenges and problems. But therefore, it's important to assess, in my opinion, these different privacy-enhancing techniques that can be of help in data spaces to achieve this goal of data sharing and data exchange. But perhaps before kicking the ball to you first, Evangelos, I can I can come to Alberto again, because you are also very heavily involved with IDS and these different initiatives. What is the approach from there with respect to these privacy enhancing techniques? Do you have a particular stance, or what are you exploring at the moment? What would you like to say?
Yeah, we can say quite a lot of things, but let's focus. Data spaces around, by design, we are focusing on this privacy and, as Sonia said, trust. We are looking for trustworthy data spaces, trust between parties exchanging data. So privacy should be there, must be there. So we can find it all around the technical components, the technical definitions, the technical usage, about IDS, the end-to-end encryption by default. But we can go on and on. For example, with the IDS technology, we can find that we have a certification authority that is not only an organization, but a technical component that has to do with a DApps component, another technical component that has to do with dynamic attributes. So anything that has to do with identification, authentication, we will find technical solutions there that are centralized, because we are looking for a really secure data space. But perhaps we need to federate this. Perhaps we need to go around and exchange data with other data spaces, and could be difficult if we have different organizations, different certification authorities. This is the reason why, for example, in IDSA and GaiaX, for example, is deeply involved in this self-sovereignty identification, SSI, And they work with this kind of ideas. I'm not going to go into it, but you have a digital wallet where you have your credential, your identification, your attributes, quite a lot of information there, and you decide what to share with who. And in this way, it's quite easy to jump from data space to data space. It's quite a standard. Gaia-X is, as I say, really involved and then deploying technology. IDS technology is going there too, but maintaining their own implementation, because we can find scenarios where we will need a centralized certification authority. So, as we say, convergence. IDS is working in this way. You will have the option to work with a central authorization. You will have the opportunity to work with self-sovereignty identity. You will have quite a lot of options there. And this has to do a lot with the core of the data space, how it works, how we relate each other, how we join parties. But there are quite a lot of other privacy-enhancing technologies. That's, for example, the homomorphic encryption that is, let's say, it has nothing to do with the data space. I mean, it has to do with the data. But when you are inside a data space, it doesn't matter where you transmit. It's agnostic. If I am sending data to Sonia, nobody else will know what we are exchanging, just data. So if it is encrypted, homomorphic encryption or whatever the solution is, we can exchange data and we can use that technology to ensure the privacy and to increase that. And well, anything that has to do with the data space, with the technology we use to exchange information will not be impacted. I will talk about, for example, multi-party computation too. That is another technology, privacy enhancing technology that has to do with, okay, we are quite a lot of people, we have our own data, and we want to process it and to get some results. But okay, having all the information together, send information to another party will be risky. So what we are going to do is to share bits and pieces between us. Each of us will run the algorithm, so nobody has the complete information, nobody has with the complete results, and at the end of the process, we will share our results, and the combination of the processing will be the final results. We will not exchange real data sets. We will work together here to reach an end. With this kind of multi-party computation, again, this is a use case of a data space usage. Anything that has to do with exchange will be part of the data space technology, but we can play with the data space. We can do quite a lot of things over it. And as we said about the synthetic data, the anonymization, it doesn't matter for the data space concept. Again, Sonia and myself, we can exchange real data or synthetic data. We can use quite a lot of these technologies and be sure. The more we use, the better, for sure. We only need to be sure, okay, if this has to do with the identity, with authentication, perhaps it will impact on the data space technology, and that will be important. But if it has to do with this data management, data quality, anything that we do with the data, it's over it, so the developers will not have problems in this kind of data spaces work. And I think that the Trustee platform is a good example of how can we use any existing or any future data space or data space idea, providing more security, more privacy over it, without, well, in Trustee, as Evangelos will say now, I think that they are working on different solutions, and it doesn't matter. They can use any kind of data space they like in the future.
Yes, indeed. Perhaps I can now come back to Evangelos. Alberto actually gave a good overview as to like what they're considering, but it's also good to have these different research projects that put these different ideas, these different technologies into test. And like, what would be your experience from the Trustee project? You mainly mentioned homomorphic encryption. We can touch upon that, but anything else that comes up to your mind, please go ahead.
Okay. The real question here is, eventually we are starting in European Union to discuss about data spaces, but eventually we have been blindfolded in the part of if the data at the moment can be shared, because there are multiple standards describing data, and the combination of them, it's a nightmare putting out the part of the data spaces. So, going now to the part of the privacy enhancing the technology, the part of the legal view of all these technologies as the same technology aspect is something that maybe for me as a, let's say, a technological person, it's something that it does not fit well, because let's say I understand that the legal framework for the part of the synthetic data can be specific, but then you have different technologies. So a very interesting question that maybe we can discuss in this panel is that if one regulation can fit all PET, and on the part of trustee, the trustee is trying to use the homomorphic encryption as an enabler of data fusion, let's say, of data. And in this way, we are trying to create a proof of concept of the part of how multidisciplinarity can eventually help in day-to-day operations, because we discussed, and this was very good paradigm from Veli, the part of how we can use educational and energy data in order to minimize cost, or how we can use health data with educational data to understand if the education is related to the health of individuals. So this brings into the table new ways of federating data, and this is something that data space has in mind. Is creating endpoints, and she say here is an endpoint and there is another endpoint. There are two different data providers on this place, but Trust is trying to say, we know these endpoints, we unite this data, and we are creating the platform for enable the real computation over the combination of data. That's all.
Perfect, that's already great. I mean, we threw in there all these different terminologies with respect to these pets. Perhaps a very, very brief question to Veli. Like, what does this mean from an end user perspective? Because it's already complicated enough, like for us, like even like it sounds all complicated. How do we achieve these? Like, how is the implementation of all of these different technologies within a data space, like SSI, homomorphic encryption? What would be the concern from an end user perspective? Do you have any comments on that, perhaps?
It's a big question. I wanted to add just a couple of things. Yes, and it's a very important question, and as I like to call as the conscience of the project. But I like to ground, again, within the human rights perspective. What are we doing? Why are we doing? And for whom are we doing this? So at a pre-design stage, it's important that we set up the legal socio-ethical requirements before we get to adding the different technological components to examine, discover, and explore the possibilities of the endless possibilities of data spaces. I think the several important things are first the traceability and the accountability. These are all things, and even auditing, and in order to ensure accountability, these are all things that can be implemented both at technological and non-technological, and that's our biggest challenge and part of the objective of Trustee. So it pre-design that, and then as an output for the end users, there's also that aspect of accountability, traceability, explainability of what data spaces are about, what are their limitations, what are the opportunities, how the design has been set up and all that. So it's a combination of really non-technical, technical, but from the pre-design all the way throughout the life cycle of such data spaces development.
And you always emphasize indeed like how all of these approaches should still be human-centric, like it needs to be understandable to the end users, and needs to also incorporate this socio-ethical perspective, socio-ethical requirements, and also the legal requirements. And that's why I would like to now come to Kasia, because perhaps you can comment on all these privacy-enhanced techniques from a legal perspective. By the implementation of these, do we aim to bypass laws? How do they fit within all these legal landscape? Like how are they, especially with respect to homomorphic encryption, perhaps you will comment more on that, but are they indeed adequate enough from a legal perspective with respect to protecting the privacy of individuals and enhancing privacy, basically?
Okay, again, very broad and a deep question, but I would like to perhaps touch upon what Evangelos mentioned, that but whether we have any law that fits all and whether we can have just one common understanding of pets. I would say that, from the data protection perspective, I would be speaking. The GDPR doesn't provide specific definition of pets or doesn't provide information what kind of technologies exactly would need to be used to protect the data and to protect privacy of the data subjects. It rather provides the open list of different technologies that could be considered and should be considered, but at a very general level, a very technologically neutral level. And here, what kind of pets would be then chosen and applied in a specific technical infrastructure, it depends on what the needs of the project or the needs of the users, future users of this infrastructure. And it also depends on which principles in the specific scenario should be addressed or should be taken into account in the first place. With regards to, for example, homomorphic encryption that we discussed, here we are talking about the technology that allows to ensure security, confidentiality of the data, but also when it comes to principles, perhaps also accuracy of the data, because of course it depends on what kind of input data will be provided and if they are correct or not. But if yes, then this computation conducted on encrypted data can bring the same results as if it was conducted on the real data and the data where we know the value, the data value. And I believe that it's really the matter of selection, first of all, and second of all, of then appropriate assessment of what this technology allows us to address and how to allows us to ensure the privacy and the data protection. And also regarding the point that you mentioned, whether pets are actually there to bypass the privacy or to enforce it rather, I would say that it's the latter, right? I mean, well, the name is privacy enhancing technologies. It's not the aim to avoid, let's say, ensuring privacy. It's rather the matter of making sure that the privacy is really secured. And yes, so 2 cents from my side.
No, perfect indeed, because like we also encounter this in the projects too. Like there are some technical terms thrown, and like just because there's like this technical like privacy enhancing technique out there, like and by just applying it without really delving into in what circumstances it's really protecting the data, is it really like is the data anonymized, or is the data still can be like are the data subjects are still re-identifiable, like even with the application of the privacy enhanced technique?
Here, I believe that also what was already mentioned in the previous panel regarding synthetic data, the recent decision of the General Court of the European Union, it actually brings further the discussion. I mean, what is personal versus non-personal, and for whom is personal or non-personal? And in the case of the homomorphic encryption, I'm focusing on homomorphic encryption because this is the major or core part of Trustworthy project and what we would like to provide. But here, in this case, the question is whether the data for some actors that are involved in the implementation of the or use of the homomorphic encryption, whether for some of them the data would be non-personal, considering that they wouldn't have any legal instruments to actually try to re-identify a data subject, and there are no reasonably likely means that would be used for re-identification. So I think that here we are, I mean, I would say the discussion is still ongoing, and also for us, the assessment, I mean, what homomorphic encryption actually allows us to do also depends very much on the outcome of the discussion and of the outcome, how the different communities that are involved in data spaces, but also in the project such as Trustworthy, would approach this and would interpret this.
Definitely. Thank you so much for the comments. I'm also aware of our time, but we still have quite some interesting questions to discuss. And that's why I would like to move towards this concept of accountability, traceability, because the recurring theme for us of this panel is ensuring trust between different participants of a data space. And we already heard from you in your introductory statements what could possibly be the challenges. And that's also pretty much what this whole common European data spaces proposal was based on, that some parties were reluctant to share data, even though by sharing data, this could really lead to a good discovery of good potential of data, but how it's not that simple, that we should still have the mechanisms and infrastructures in place to ensure that the laws are applied by, data protection and privacy are also respected, and like there is this trustworthiness that should always be underlying all this data space design and development, right? And in my opinion, accountability and traceability obviously is a big element of this. But how do we achieve this? What do we mean when we say accountability? And perhaps I can again refer here from the IDSA perspective, but either to Sonia and also Alberto, like to hear your perspectives, because you also work a lot with this technical infrastructure, technical traceability, like these even certification schemes in the IDSA that we see. What do these really mean? Like how do they contribute to this discussions with respect to accountability? Perhaps Alberto, you can kick off, and then Sonia, you can take over with the certification. Thank you so much.
Yeah, but what's happening there, tracking, knowing who is who, before even sending the data spaces concept has to do with this. What happens before we exchange data? Because quite a lot of things happen. We get in touch, we identify each other, we know who I am, we speak with I mean the both parties, with IDS could be the best example, two different IDS connectors, two different technical pieces that will exchange information, will exchange data. Before that exchange, they will share information about what kind of data you have. I have this kind of data, but you need to accomplish this kind of rules. You have here this contract. This negotiation will happen automatically there. The idea is to have less people involved as possible, to make this kind of decision. But at any point, it could be human intervention for sure. The process is prepared for that. But the idea is that the conversation between both parties and the agreements both technical sides reach even before exchanging data is really important, because in this communication, in this negotiation, we will store the contracts, we will store the agreements. You say, okay, I'm going to send to you this kind of data under these conditions. Okay, here you got the contract. Both parties, we will have the agreements, we will have signatures, we will have quite a lot of information there that has to do with the negotiation and the relationship we are establishing here that will be used for tracking, for addition, for quite a lot of things. And after we agree, of course, if we disagree, connection will be lost, and we will not exchange data. But if we reach this data exchange, before that, we will keep quite a lot of information. The IDS connector is built for that. It's by design that, and the idea with data spaces in general is that the technical pieces involved there will match this kind of implementation. I think that Sonia will expose later on, but let me please say that, for example, in IDS, again, they know that perhaps this is not enough. Perhaps we'll need a third party. Under IDS architecture, we have this IDS clearinghouse. It's, again, a technical piece, a third party in the same architecture, where if we both parties agrees, we will store this same information, these contracts, this negotiation we are doing, and we even store information, not the real data we are exchanging, but we can store in this clearinghouse, in this technical piece, we can store information about what we are doing, when we are contacting, what kind of information. We can use this third party. Again, never store the real data there, just metadata, just what is happening there. But we will have a third party that is able to say things about what's happening on the data space. Perhaps the data space authority or a third party needs information, or the government needs to know what's happening there. The government can request us information and can compare it with a third party. This component is not mandatory at all, could be optional, could be a component inside the data space. And perhaps Sonia and myself, we agree to use it, but Evangelos and myself, we said, okay, we are going to pass, we are going to exchange, because we like each other a lot, we trust each other, so we say, okay, we are not to use that because we trust enough. That could be an option. And again, we can find quite a lot of technologies. We can use blockchains to implement this kind of clearing houses or this kind of audition system inside the data space. And I think that here is really important, because additionally, with IDS, we have these certification schemes and this kind of approaches that really helps that perhaps Sonia can speak about it.
Sure. So in the IDS, we've defined the set of components that enable this secure data sharing. So we have specifications for this connector, so the gateways that send the actual data. The rest of the components only trade with metadata. So for instance, the clearinghouse would only receive metadata, never the actual data. And then we have the components that are in charge of identity management. So as Alberto explained, you need to have an identity before you start sending or receiving data. So that's mandatory. And so we have the specifications in place. They're actually open in public repositories for anyone that has interest could take the specifications and develop their own connector. But we need to make sure that whoever claims to have an IDS connector has really developed it according to the specifications, and that this connector has been tested, and that we can say, yes, this is a compliant IDS connector. And that's why we have the IDS certification in place. So we have defined a certification scheme with different assurance levels, because we mentioned here several times, we need to focus on the use case. And every use case might be different, which means the security requirements might also differ a little bit. So we have different assurance levels, from basic assurance level to a very high assurance level, where we make sure that this component, this connector, meets all the requirements, all the security requirements, interoperability requirements. We test that. We have a tool, a reference testbed, where we test that the connector can perform all the functionalities that it's meant to perform. So we can test that it can get a digital identity from these components, that it can store metadata, the broker, that it can send data to another connector, receive data. All of this is what we test in the certification. The certification is a really thorough process. It's based on 156 criteria. So it's a real in-depth certification. We have one way to do it as a self-assessment, so that's entry level, so to say. But we also have third-party evaluation with external evaluation facilities that conduct all the tests for the connector. To really make sure you can send information, send data, and receive data in a secure way in a data space. So data spaces will also decide what level of security they need. That means what kind of certification assurance level they need for their data space. And on top of this, besides certifying the components, we also certify the participants. So we also certified that the environment where the component is installed is also trustworthy. And this is based on the ISO 27001, which also proves that the physical environment, but also the processes and the rules from the company are also trustworthy. So we combine these two types of certification in order to bring trust to the data space.
Perfect. Thank you so much for this thorough explanation too. I know we're very short on time, but I would still like to hear from Katarzyna and Veli very briefly, because we talked about accountability, the traceability of the actions in a data space, and you explained very well how to ensure both the accountability of each components, whether they fit this trustworthiness scheme, and how we can then ensure the actions and trace the actions of different parties. You talked about, Alberto, this blockchain technology, and perhaps Katarzyna, you would like to point very briefly on that too, from the legal perspective, because we understood it from a technical level more, but from a legal perspective, what do we mean by accountability? What can there be solutions to ensure this?
Well, I believe that from the legal perspective, accountability means, who is responsible for the specific action, and what are the rights and what are the obligations of the party. And in the view of how technology can support also the, let's say, implementation of the formal arrangements between the parties, I believe that what Alberto mentioned, that the use of, for example, smart contracts and the possibility to implement all of the data usage policies that may be signed or concluded between the parties, and also the SLA, service level agreements, that to translate them into the machine-readable format and to enable the technology to support the actual implementation of the agreements, and to track who is acting in what manner and whether according to the initial agreements, is of great relevance. And also the aspect of usage control and tracking how the data are used by a specific party step by step in all of the phases of the transaction is also of much relevance, because of course we can agree formally on something, but it's also relevant in the technological environment to make sure that it's really followed by the players that are there and who agreed on some terms and conditions.
Perfect, thank you. And perhaps Veli, like if you have anything to share, and perhaps you can also sort of share your like wrapping up comments, like concluding statements with respect to what should be the way forward. We're aware, but it will be nice to perhaps just very, very short hear from the participants.
Very short. I think just one thing, the multidisciplinary, technical, non-technical aspect of working on these data spaces is crucial. Sitting together and talking about my view, your view, and then imagining different scenarios is really, really crucial for ongoing research and constantly updating the needs, requirements, because we cannot exhaust the scenarios and the risks, but also the opportunities, of course. Just as a way forward, since it's part of our title, I think that advancing the research and the conversation is crucial. We also need to the work around Trustworthy, for example, is required as much as all of these other European projects similar to Trustworthy. These can be good examples for industry in terms of how do we develop these functionalities around accountability, traceability, auditability, enforcing rules and conditions, and so on. And another way forward would be, of course, to inform policy as well, and kind of policy enforces onto the industry. But that's for another panel, perhaps. Thank you.
Perhaps Evangelos, you would also like to make a concluding statement. Any last remarks for the way forward?
I think the way forward is to sit on a table and discuss, and this is what we are doing. And of course, the treating of different technologies with different legal perspective is something also that, for me, it's mandatory.
And perhaps any last comments from anyone else? Katarzyna?
I believe that perhaps we should give the floor to the audience if there are any questions.
Perfect, yes. Any questions from the audience? Lovely. I see one hand.
Thank you so much. My name is Alora. I'm a doctoral researcher at KU Leuven. And I have two quick questions. So the first one is to the panel. You must have heard this question before, and I don't really expect an answer necessarily because I know it's challenging. So it's really related to your views on how the DGA's definition of intermediaries affect data spaces. So what kind of data spaces you see fit in this definition, and what are the implications for the governance model, business model, and also the technical reference architecture. And second is to Velislava. Thank you so much for bringing the human rights perspective, and I would like to hear your view on what will be the specific challenges of data spaces to children's rights in specific. This is something that I don't see many discussions about, and here I'm thinking, for example, of the data spaces for skills that will certainly pull up data related to education, for example, so children's behavior, etc. So we already have many challenges related to ATAC, for example. So what are the challenges that come when we implement then the interoperability and then the data spaces infrastructure? Thank you.
Who would like to go first? Perhaps Kasia? Yeah.
I must admit that I'm asking the same question. First and foremost, when it comes to data intermediary services and data intermediary services providers, I think that it's still quite a fresh definition, and I also am aware of the discussions within the IDSA, for example, in the Task Force Legal, but I also believe that, if I'm not mistaken, Data Spaces Support Center, that this is also the discussion. Who will be included in the definition, whether only data markets, whether also some other platforms for data sharing, not necessarily data markets themselves, and to what extent, and then what will be the obligations and how actually those entities, not necessarily only data markets, but also orchestrators of data sharing, data exchange, how they should adhere to the requirements that are set in the DGA, especially considering that let's say, the data spaces, this is an ongoing initiative. So there are already existing data spaces that would need to adjust to the current set of requirements that is going to be applicable very soon, because in September 2023. So here I would say that also within the project, we had discussion, and the discussion is ongoing. Actually, the project is at a quite early stage, and there is a discussion about how we should interpret what we are providing. Are we data intermediary service or not? And I hope that next year we'll be able to answer this question like fully, what we considered and what is the outcome of the consideration.
Perhaps Veli, you would like to take over?
Yeah, I would love to talk to you after that. It's an excellent question, and part of why I'm with this project is to understand within the research environment, how do we do it in the right way when we share data, when we use data. And that's why I made this point on informing policy and giving a good example to industry, because what the edtech industry and industry overall, tech industry, are doing is not necessarily the right way. And in edtech, there is so much exploitation. I mean, this is the work that I do. I think it's a good example of how we are developing, the methodology, the tools to enforce rules, terms, the accountability, the auditability of it all, which is the thing that I personally, as a researcher and expert in the edtech and education, from children's rights perspective, thank you so much for the question, but how I can pull that out and take it for the education environment and ensure that, the edtech are held accountable when they collect data from kids. We can talk more. Thanks.
Any other questions, perhaps? Final questions?
Before, while you speak and will you decide if you have more questions, I think that perhaps a huge point here is that we are doing this for the data and for self-sovereignty of the data. The data owner, the data holder, and we are doing this because data is money. And data market is there, and we want to reach it. And I don't know, IDS technology, for example, it has a lot to do and is completely ready to deal with this management of the data. The relationship between data and money is huge. If you look at the sponsor of this event, you can see that they are solution providers, software providers, but I think that personal opinion, they make more money from data than from services. And this is happening. This is so important, and we are so many people involved in here because this data means money. And we want to get to the people. We want to ensure that not only huge players manage the data, but we have more opportunities there. Little companies, small, medium companies, even people will be involved in this data market, in this data exchange. And this is the last minute point, but this is the huge. We need legal, we need human rights, we need quite a lot of things because we will deal with money, real money, not only data for research, not only that are really important, artificial intelligence, processing data, but we will reach the data for money, and the data value is impressive there.
Thank you very much. Thank you so much for listening to us as well, and we hope to perhaps continue some of the discussions in the coffee breaks and the lunch break that's going to come. Thank you.